Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you. My name is Sagar Indurkhya. I'm presenting jointly on behalf of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and also Virtualytics Inc., where I'm the head of natural language processing. So today I'm going to be presenting some work I've been doing on modeling the ordering of English adjectives using collaborative filtering. So first, I'd like to give you just high-level overview of the task. What is it that the problem I'm aiming to solve? So the idea is that when we will oftentimes see adjectives appear in pairs, right? For example, you may say that there's a dangerous political entity. Typically say there's a political dangerous entity. And so when we start to observe adjective biograms that appear in corpus, notice that there are oftentimes very particular orderings that appear. They're very strict. And it's not clear how people come to learn these orderings, but when you talk to people, you'll find that consistently they'll agree on those. Um, there are also just different types of adjectives that appear to be unordered. So this is a topic that's been studied for quite a long time. Additionally, the way it's been approached is people have established effectively semantic of adjectives and established a linear hierarchy over these semantic classes of adjectives. And they would assert that this hierarchy, which is effectively a linear hierarchy, translates into the linear precedence ordering over adjectives that you observe in corpus data. And so then the task is, given corpus data, and more specifically biograms of adjectives that appear in corpus data, can you build a model that is productive and can predict new orderings between adjectives when you've never seen that pair of adjectives before? So in this example, for example, you have adjectives like dangerous, military, foreign, dark, political, and destructive. And you've seen where you have the arrows, you've seen in those cases like pretty strong ordering relations that have been established. But now there's a question of, does foreign typically come before destructive, or does destructive come between foreign? And when you look at the data, what you find is that destructive will usually precede foreign, right? And the question is, how can we infer that by looking at this other data here? And the approach that I'm taking in this study is to apply a method called collaborative filtering to do that. So now I'll walk into a little bit of what collaborative filtering is. Okay, so just a quick background on filtering. I won't read all of the text. Instead, I'll try to give a more description based on like system we're familiar with. So a classic example of collaborative filtering is how if you've used a streaming service such as Netflix, right? Netflix has access to a large number of users, and there's a lot of different items, that is like the different movies that you can stream. And there's a question of how do you recommend to different users which movies they might be interested in. So one way they can do that is using this collaborative filtering algorithm, where the idea is that for a given user, you look at the movies that they've liked or disliked, you compare it to other users who have similar patterns of likes and dislikes, and then you see what other movies similar users who have a similar user profile would like as a movie. And that's how they make a recommendation to you. And so there are various different types of collaborative filtering algorithms, right? That's just a broad overview of the class of those algorithms. And in this study, I used two particular model-based collaborative filtering algorithms. One is that's a predictive model that's learned. And in particular, it's a latent factor model, such as singular value decomposition or non-negative matrix factorization that employed dimensionality reduction. And this is really important because one of the things that I do is I take the Google Ngram database. I take all the bigrams for adjectives, right? And that you can imagine the co-occurrence matrix of adjectives in the Google Ngram database gets quite large. And we're trying to, be very careful with the types of assumptions that we make on what learner would have access to. I don't think a human learner is necessarily going to be storing something akin to a 10,000 by 10,000 matrix in their head. They most likely have some kind of dimensionality reduction they use to efficiently store it in memory. So not to say that's exactly what humans do, but I'm trying to say that like humans, when we're trying to build a cognitively faithful model, we don't want to say that humans have access to a very large amount of memory, sort of like in an array form. Okay. So let me keep going. Um, Okay, so now for an overview of the experiment and the solution. So I'm presenting a novel procedure for acquiring productive knowledge restrictions on adjective ordering from counts of adjective bigrams. And these are readily obtainable from natural language corpora. I just happen to use the pre-processed form from the Google Ngram database. And we're doing this by taking the users, right? Going back to that Netflix user item analogy. The users are going to be the preceding adjective and the items succeeding adjective. So given one adjective, I want you to recommend to me what's another adjective that could follow it. That's what the model's trying to do. We employ two model-based collaborative filtering algorithms, singular value decomposition and non-negative matrix factorization. Oops, there's a typo here. This is actually work that I've applied from a similar project because this method appears to work quite well across different types of constituency relations, not just adjective orderings, but also verb-noun relations. So sorry about that. And we evaluated the procedure by first training the underlying collaborative filtering model on subsets of the largest publicly available data set of English adjective bigrams, the Google Books Ngram database, and then measuring the model's capacity to predict the ordering of unseen pairs of adjectives. So that's what I meant by saying it's a productive model. And then we also evaluated a baseline model. We refer to as with this particular symbol, and this is going to serve as a reference point against which we can compare the performance of the collaborative filtering models. And this baseline model is a model of a linear hierarchy of adjectives. So the intent here with the baseline model is, when trying to develop this filtering approach, naturally one question that's going to be raised is, well, how does this compare against other work that's been done on modeling adjective ordering by trying to map the adjectives against this kind of linear hierarchy of semantic classes of adjectives. And so in the paper, there's like an extensive section where I kind of go and compare all of the different previous attempts to do adjective modeling and show how they kind of fit into this linear hierarchy of adjectives approach. And that's what the baseline is trying to capture. Okay, so then just a few details about methodology. So again, we're using the American English subset of the Google Books Ngram database for the years 1969 to 2019. Then what we do is we derive an adjective ordering matrix, which is the input used to train the model-based collaborative filtering algorithms. So this is classically referred to as the user item matrix. If you look up the literature on collaborative filtering, and instead of user items, I'm having preceding and succeeding adjective pairs. And so what I do is I want to, in this adjective ordering matrix, encode the whether or not given two adjectives, there's a strong ordering one way or the other, or it's just to be considered unordered. And the way I do that is I use a two-tailed binomial test to relative frequency of the bigram of adjectives going both ways. So that's where you see adjective xy versus frequency of adjective yx, with the null hypothesis corresponding to an unordered relation. And we also construct several adjective ordering matrices. So that allowed us to conduct several different experiments to kind of explore the space. The first thing we did was we restricted the matrices to 4 different versions. One version was, just using all adjectives that appear in the Ngram database. They just, basically the full matrix. That's just. We then have subsets of the matrix that are restricted to adjectives that can also be nouns, adjectives that can also be verbs, and adjectives that are not found as nouns or verbs, comparing it against WordNet. The second thing we did was we also interpreted these matrices, so each of these 4 matrices, as a directed graph, and we have a procedure described in the paper for removing connections, as few as possible, to generate an acyclic each matrix. And the reason we did that was because the thinking was, when acyclic version of this adjective ordering matrix, you can then actually try to lay it down across like a kind of a linear hierarchy. And so we understand like how would the baseline model and the collaborative filtering model perform relatively on the acyclic versus the cyclic forms of these matrices. So that describes the input to our model. And then here are some of the results, just to jump ahead. So overall, the 2 collaborative filtering models that we tried, non-negative matrix factorization and singular value decomposition, they both the baseline on each of the 8 adjective ordering matrices. The way that we're measuring performance is using area under the receiver operating characteristic curve, because remember that the collaborative filtering model, it's going to be outputting like a value, in our case between 1 and 2, trying to describe how much it thinks an adjective is ordered versus for each entry in the adjective ordering matrix that we're asked to fill in. We have to set some kind of threshold for making a classification decision. And so when varying that threshold, right, how does the performance vary? That's what AUROC is measuring. We also have some overall statistics about these adjective ordering matrices that we produced. We also observed that the baseline performed better on the acyclic data sets than on the full data sets. And that's not too surprising because the baseline is a model of linear adjectives. I think that's one thing that's very interesting, is just this observation that there are cycles of adjective ordering. That was not something I expected to see, but it's also documented in that paper. We give lots of examples of these 3 cycles of adjectives. And it's actually pretty cool. You can go online to the Google Ngram database website, and you can type in these 3 pairs of adjective baselines, adjective bigrams, and you will actually see consistently historically, like, they do form an ordering cycle. And then overall, our results show that both model-based collaborative filtering algorithms are performing pretty well in the task of predicting adjective ordering. That assertion is just made on the basis that typically when you have AUROC above 0.75, or sometimes closer to 0.8, the algorithm is considered to be performing relatively well, not all that great, right? It could be much better, up to 0.9, as we've seen in other applications of collaborative filtering to linguistics. And 2, form the baseline model that's grounded in a ranking of adjectives meant to correlate with a linear hierarchy of classes. Okay, so some of my conclusions that I've drawn, and this is just part of an ongoing project to see if for different types of constituent selection that can happen in syntax, can I apply these collaborative filtering methods? That's what I've been kind of exploring. But so this particular study showed that collaborative filtering models, when we train them on adjective bigram data that we can get from any corpus off the shelf or any like bigram database off the shelf, they do perform well on the task of predicting the ordering of unseen adjective pairs. It's a productive model. We've compared of our collaborative filtering models against a baseline grounded in a ranking of adjectives intended to parallel a linear hierarchy of adjective classes. So that kind of connects this work against the overall growing body of work studying adjective orderings. And as I mentioned in the last slide, our results show that the collaborative filtering models consistently perform better than the baseline model. And I think the reason this is happening is because collaborative filtering models are leveraging adjective ordering data that doesn't neatly align with proposed hierarchies of adjective classes. They also did markedly better on the cyclic, the full adjective ordering matrices that had cyclic data. And then finally, and more broadly, just to put this whole study in context, this was motivated by the desire to see how far productive corpus-based models can be taken when they're restricted to adjective bigram statistics, right? So a lot of times in other studies, they will not just consider the adjective bigrams, but they'll also consider like what are the particular nouns being modified by the adjective bigram. So this is a fairly restricted set of data we're taking in comparison to some other approaches. It doesn't require retention of the entire adjective co-occurrence matrix after. This is another thing that many different studies require at some point, that you have to actually store that full matrix. In our approach, you never actually have to store that full matrix. And finally, it's robust in the face of sparse data sets. The adjective ordering data sets are quite sparse, and we talk about that in the paper. And it's got to make predictions ordering of previously unseen adjective pairs. So again, it's got to be productive. So those were some of the constraints that kind of guided the approach that we took. So I didn't run too far over time. But yeah, if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to take them.